Headlights cut through the thick fog blanketing the remote mountain pass as the convoy of freight trucks lumbered forward, unaware of the makeshift roadblock ahead. Swaying figures emerged from the mist, rifles clutched in unsteady hands, empty, tequila bottles scattered at their feet. But what these drunken cartel soldiers couldn't know, one of the drivers leading that convoy wasn't just another trucker. He was a decorated combat veteran with a particular set of skills they were about to discover the hard way. Before we continue, have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone underestimated you, only to regret it later? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible true stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when pushed to their limits. The winding roads of the Sierra Madre Occidental were treacherous even in perfect conditions. Tonight, with a heavy blanket of fog reducing visibility to mere yards, they were downright deadly. The steep cliffs and hairpin turns demanded absolute focus, something Miguel Santos had in abundance. His weathered hands gripped the wheel of his massive Kenworth rig with practiced precision, eyes constantly scanning what little of the road the headlights revealed. Miguel wasn't supposed to be leading this particular convoy. At 58, with almost 3 decades of cross-border hauling behind him, he had earned the right to pick his routes. The coastal highways were safer, more predictable. But when Ernesto, the original lead driver, called in sick at the last minute, Miguel had volunteered to take his place. The cargo, medical supplies bound for rural hospitals in northern Mexico, was too important to delay. "Checkpoint ahead? Looks unofficial," crackled a voice through the CB radio. It was Diego, the youngest driver in their 4-truck convoy, positioned in the 3rd rig. "I count at least 7 men on the road." Miguel's jaw tightened as he peered through the windshield. The fog parted just enough to reveal a haphazard barricade of vehicles stretched across the mountain road. This high up, with sheer drops on one side and rock walls on the other, there was nowhere to go but forward or back, and going back wasn't an option on these narrow roads. "I see them," Miguel responded, his voice calm despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. This wasn't his first roadblock in 28 years of driving the Mexican backroads, but something about this one felt off. "Everyone stay alert. Follow my lead." He slowed the massive truck, downshifting methodically as years of training from another lifetime kicked in. Before he was a trucker, Miguel had served 15 years with Mexican Special Forces, specializing in counter-cartel operations. He'd seen combat in the worst drug corridors of the country before hanging up his uniform. Most days, that part of his life felt distant. Tonight, as figures with rifles materialized in his headlights, those memories felt freshly awakened. Miguel's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. The men weren't positioned like professional sicarios, the disciplined hitmen cartels typically employed for important operations. Their stances were unsteady, movements erratic. 2 were openly drinking from bottles, laughing as they waved their weapons carelessly. Either this was a very sloppy cartel operation, or these men were dangerously intoxicated. Neither option was good. "Miguel, what's the play?" The voice belonged to Luis, an older driver in the 2nd truck, a man who had driven with Miguel for over a decade. "These don't look like federales." "They're not," Miguel confirmed, noting the lack of uniforms or official vehicles. "And they're not professional gunmen either. They're drunk. That makes them unpredictable." He made a quick decision. "Everyone stay in your rigs. No sudden movements. Let me do the talking." The lead truck ground to a halt about 30 yards from the roadblock. The other 3 trucks stopped in line behind him, engines idling, headlights illuminating the scene in harsh white light and long shadows. 8 men stood spread across the road, wielding an assortment of weapons, mostly AK-47s and pistols. Their vehicles, 2 pickup trucks and an SUV with the Los Halcones cartel insignia crudely painted on the sides, formed a makeshift barrier. The cartel wasn't even trying to hide their identity, which was either extremely confident or extremely stupid. One man, taller than the others and wearing a garish gold chain over a black tactical vest, stepped forward. He swayed slightly, raising a half-empty bottle in one hand and a pistol in the other. A Colt 45, from what Miguel could make out through the fog. The leader, presumably. "You know the drill, truckers," he shouted, his words slightly slurred. "Toll payment to pass through Los Halcones territory." Miguel took a deep breath and reached under his seat, fingers brushing against the cold metal of the Beretta M9 he'd kept from his service days. He didn't draw it, not yet, but knowing it was there steadied him. Slowly, deliberately, he opened his door and stepped down from the cab, keeping his movements unthreatening. "Good evening," Miguel called out, his voice firm but neutral. "We're just passing through with medical supplies, hospital deliveries." The leader laughed, the sound echoing across the mountain pass. "Medical supplies? Even better. Medications fetch a good price." He gestured with his bottle, spilling tequila down. His wrist. "Open the trucks. Everything valuable comes out. Then maybe you drive away." Maybe. The threat wasn't subtle. Miguel had seen this scenario play out before. Highway robberies often ended with drivers shot, trucks burned at the bottom of ravines. The drunkenness of these men made them more dangerous, not less. Miguel took a few measured steps forward, hands visible at his sides. In the military, he'd learned to read threats, to identify weaknesses. The men were bunched too close together, poor tactical positioning. 2 were more focused on passing a bottle than watching the trucks. The leader was intoxicated enough that his gun hand wavered unsteadily. "We can work something out," Miguel said, continuing his slow approach. "We have a small cash fund for road expenses, but the supplies are needed in Chihuahua. Children are waiting for these medications." His words were calculated, humanizing the cargo, offering a small bribe, keeping them talking while he closed distance and continued his assessment. 20 feet from the leader now, close enough to see the glazed look in his eyes. "Your cash. Your cargo, your trucks," the leader stated, punctuating each word by waving his pistol. "Or we start shooting tires, then drivers." The other cartel members laughed, emboldened by their leader's bravado. One fired a shot into the air, the crack of the rifle amplified by the mountain walls. Miguel didn't flinch. He'd heard much worse. "In much closer quarters. That's unnecessary," Miguel replied, his tone hardening just slightly. "We're reasonable men, but there are 4 of us, and we need to get these supplies through. 4 drivers against 8 cartel soldiers," another gunman shouted, stepping forward unsteadily. "You like those odds, old man?" Miguel's face remained impassive, but inwardly he made note of an important detail. They hadn't recognized him. The fog and darkness were working in his favor. 7 years ago, Miguel had been part of the special operations team that had taken down the previous leadership of Los Halcones. His face had never been in the media, but within cartel circles, some still remembered the Ghost of Sinaloa, the nickname they'd given to the operative who had led that raid. If these men knew who he was, they wouldn't be so careless. "How about this?" Miguel proposed, taking another step forward. Now just 15 feet separated him from the leader. We give you the cash we carry. You let us pass. Everyone wins. The leader tilted his head, considering. For a moment, Miguel thought negotiation might work. Then the man's face contorted in drunken anger. No deals. Open the trucks now. He fired his pistol into the ground near Miguel's feet, the bullet kicking up dust and gravel. Next one goes in your leg. Behind him, Miguel heard the CB radio crackle as the other drivers watched the standoff unfold. He could sense their fear, knew they were counting on him. The cargo wasn't just valuable, it was vital. Insulin, antibiotics, vaccines for a region suffering from shortages. Miguel made his decision. Decades of discipline kept his expression neutral, but internally he was already mapping out the sequence of actions needed. 8 drunk gunmen with poor positions and worse discipline. He'd faced worse odds. "All right," he said, raising his hands slightly in apparent surrender. "No trouble. I'll open the cargo doors." The leader smirked, gesturing with his gun for Miguel to turn around. Miguel complied, turning back toward his truck, using the movement to survey the positions of all 8 men, calculating distances and angles. His hand slowly moved toward the back of his waistband, where experienced eyes might have noticed the subtle outline of his concealed Beretta. "Hurry up, old man!" the leader called out, taking another swig from his bottle. "We don't have all." "Night!" Miguel reached his truck, placing one hand on the side as if steadying himself. With the vehicle between him and the cartel members, he used the moment to slide his phone from his pocket, pressing a pre-programmed emergency sequence before returning it. A silent SOS with GPS coordinates sent to contacts from his previous life. Men who still owed him favors. Help would come, but not soon enough. These next few minutes would determine whether his convoy made it through or became another statistic in the cartel wars. Miguel thought of the hospitals waiting for these, supplies, of the 3 other drivers depending on him. He thought of the oath he'd taken years ago to protect the innocent against predators like these. He turned back toward the cartel members, who watched him with drunken impatience, their weapons still pointed in his general direction. In the fog and shadows, they couldn't see the shift in his stance, the subtle change in his eyes as the veteran operator calculated his next move. "I'm opening the truck now," Miguel called out, his voice steady. "Just stay calm." The leader laughed, waving his pistol carelessly. "We're beyond calm, trucker. We're having fun tonight." Little did he know, Miguel Santos was just getting started. And for drunken cartel gunmen who had made the mistake of stopping this particular convoy, the night was about to become anything but fun. Miguel moved toward the back of his truck with deliberate slowness, every step calculated. The fog had thickened around them, reducing visibility further and creating pools of shadow between the harsh beams of headlights. A blessing in disguise. His mind was already 3 moves ahead, assessing angles, distances, reaction times, all, while maintaining the appearance of compliance. "You should know," Miguel called over his shoulder, voice steady as he reached the rear of his truck. "These medications are temperature-controlled. If the refrigeration units lose power for too long, they become useless." The cartel leader waved his pistol dismissively. "Not my problem, viejo. Just open it up." Miguel unlocked the rear doors with a metallic click that echoed across the mountain pass. He swung one door open partially, positioning himself behind it. The heavy steel door now provided partial cover from the gunman. Not perfect, but it would. "Do come see for yourself," Miguel said. "But be careful with the containers. They're fragile, It was a calculated invitation. The leader's arrogance wouldn't allow him to send a subordinate for the first look at their prize. Human nature was predictable that way, even more so when alcohol dulled judgment. "Watch them," the leader barked to his men, gesturing toward the other trucks as he staggered forward, pistol still in hand. Nobody moves. Two of the gunmen broke away from the barricade, moving to flank Miguel as the leader approached. They maintained distance from each other, a small tactical awareness that concerned Miguel more than the leader's bravado. Even drunk, some of these men had combat experience. The leader reached the truck, peering inside at the stacked containers and refrigeration units. His face reflected blue in the glow of the temperature monitors. "What's so special about this medicine?" "Anyway," he slurred, leaning forward. "It's insulin," Miguel explained, watching as the leader's attention fixed on the cargo. "For diabetes. Without it, children die." The leader snorted. "Children die every day in Mexico. You think—" Miguel moved. Decades of combat training compressed into a fluid sequence of motion. His left hand slammed the heavy truck door into the leader's outstretched arm, pinning it against the truck frame. The pistol clattered to the ground as the man howled in pain and surprise. Simultaneously, Miguel drew the Beretta from his waistband with his right hand, leveraging the door as cover. The first flanking gunman had just enough time to register shock before Miguel fired. Two quick shots, center mass. The man dropped, rifle unfired. 3 seconds. That's all it had taken. The second flanking gunman raised his weapon, but Miguel was already moving, dragging the leader in front of him as a human shield while kicking the dropped pistol under the truck. The remaining cartel members shouted in confusion, their drunken state slowing reaction times as they tried to process the sudden reversal. "Drop your weapons!" Miguel's voice cracked like thunder across the mountain pass, the authority of his military years returning in full force. He pressed the Beretta against the leader's temple. "Now!" The remaining cartel members hesitated, alcohol and surprise rendering their response chaotic. Two immediately lowered their rifles, while others kept weapons raised uncertainly, unwilling to risk hitting their leader. "You're dead, trucker," the leader spat, struggling against Miguel's iron grip. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Miguel leaned close, his voice low enough that only the leader could hear. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Los Halcones. The question is whether you know who you're dealing with." Recognition flickered in the leader's eyes, confusion giving way to dawning horror. "It can't be. El Fantasma, the ghost of Sinaloa." So the stories still circulated. "Tell your men to drop their weapons," Miguel commanded, tightening his grip. "Or we'll see if you haunt these mountains like the men I sent before you." Fear sobered the leader instantly. "Baja las armas," he shouted to his men. "Drop them now!" The remaining weapons clattered to the asphalt. The surviving cartel members raised their hands, their drunken bravado evaporating into the mountain fog. Miguel keyed his hidden radio transmitter twice, a signal to the other drivers. Seconds later, the remaining truck doors opened and 3 armed men emerged. These weren't just ordinary truckers. Miguel had selected his team carefully. Luis was ex-police, Diego had served in the army, and Raul had been a security contractor. Not special forces, but men who knew how to handle themselves. "Kick the weapons away from them," Miguel instructed as his team advanced cautiously. "Then zip-tie their hands. Equipment's in my side compartment." The entire situation had flipped in less than a minute. The cartel members, now disarmed and increasingly sober as adrenaline counteracted alcohol, were secured one by one. Miguel kept the leader firmly in his grip, Beretta still pressed against the man's temple. "You don't understand what you're doing," the leader hissed, desperation replacing his earlier arrogance. "Los Halcones will hunt you down. We have people everywhere." Miguel smiled thinly. "I'm counting on it." Once the other cartel members were secured, Miguel marched the leader to the front of the convoy, where the headlights from all 4 trucks converged in a harsh pool of light. He wanted the man fully visible for what came next. "Phone," Miguel demanded, holding out his free hand. The leader hesitated, then reached slowly into his pocket and produced a smartphone. Miguel took it, keeping the Beretta trained on the man as he navigated to the camera function. He positioned the leader in front of the headlights, ensuring his face was clearly illuminated, then stepped back. "State your name and rank within." "Los Halcones," Miguel ordered. "Go to hell," the leader spat. Miguel fired a shot that passed inches from the man's ear. The crack echoed across the mountains. "Your name and rank." "Now." Fear won out. "Sergio Vega, Lieutenant Commander, Northern Division." Miguel nodded, recording the confession. "And these trucks you attempted to hijack, what are they carrying?" "Medical supplies," Vega muttered, "for hospitals in Chihuahua." "So you knowingly attempted to steal medicine meant for sick children?" Miguel pressed. "Medicine that would be worthless if the refrigeration failed during your hijacking." Vega remained silent, his eyes darting between Miguel and the camera. "Answer me," Miguel insisted, voice dangerously low. "Yes," Vega finally admitted. Miguel continued the impromptu interrogation, methodically documenting Vega's involvement in other highway robberies, extortion operations, and cartel activities throughout the region. With each confession, Vega's face grew paler, realizing the depth of the evidence being compiled against him. When Miguel had what he needed, he stopped the recording and pocketed both phones. Then he turned to Luis, who stood guard over the other bound cartel members. "Take their vehicles, disable the tracking systems first," Miguel instructed. "We'll need them for what comes next." Luis nodded, understanding immediately. Diego and Raúl moved to carry out the orders, collecting keys from the bound men. "What are you doing?" Vega asked, genuine fear now evident in his voice. Miguel smiled coldly. "Sending a message." Under Miguel's direction, the team efficiently commandeered the cartel vehicles. Diego, who had a background in electronics, located and disabled the GPS trackers. Raúl transferred the bound cartel members into the backs of their own pickup trucks, securing them thoroughly. Only Vega remained separate, still held at gunpoint by Miguel. "You should have let us pass," Miguel told him quietly. "Your men might still be walking, your reputation might still be intact, but you made the mistake many make. You saw trucks and thought the men inside them were easy targets." Vega stared at him with naked hatred. "You can't win against Los Halcones. We'll find you. We'll find your families." Miguel's expression hardened. "That's exactly what I'm counting on. You think I just happened to be on this route tonight, leading this specific convoy?" He leaned closer. "I've been waiting for Los Halcones to make exactly this mistake." Confusion replaced some of the hatred in Vega's eyes. "What are you talking about?" "7 years ago, I helped dismantle the leadership of Los Halcones," Miguel explained. "But like a cancer, you grew back. Different faces, same disease. My former commanders declared victory and moved on. I knew better." Understanding dawned on Vega's face. This was a trap. Miguel nodded slightly. "Not originally, but opportunities present themselves to those prepared to seize them. By now, the team had finished securing the cartel members and their vehicles. Diego approached, nodding to indicate they were ready for the next phase. "We have a schedule to keep," Miguel said, checking his watch, "and medications to deliver." "What happens to us?" Vega asked, looking at his bound men. Miguel considered the question. "That depends on how much Los Halcones values your life. Call it a test of loyalty." He gestured to Luis, who bound Vega's hands in front of him, differently from the others. Miguel then retrieved a satellite phone from his truck and placed it in Vega's bound hands. "You get one call," Miguel instructed. "To your superiors. You'll tell them exactly what happened here. How a convoy of medical supplies outsmarted and captured Los Halcones' northern lieutenant and his men. How the ghost of Sinaloa has returned." Vega stared at the phone. "And if I refuse? Then I leave you all here, bound and helpless in cartel territory, with evidence of your failure distributed to every rival organization," Miguel stated matter-of-factly. "How long do you think you'll last, once word spreads that Los Halcones can't even handle a simple highway robbery?" The choice was clear in Vega's eyes. Reputation was everything in the cartel world. Failure was punished severely. With trembling fingers, Vega dialed. When a gruff voice answered, he took a deep breath and began to explain the situation, his voice growing more desperate with each word. Miguel watched impassively, knowing the seeds of fear were being planted within the cartel's hierarchy. When the call ended, Vega looked up, defeated. "They want proof of life for all of us. Then they'll discuss terms." Miguel nodded, having expected this. "They'll have their proof and their terms." He took the phone back and turned to his team. "Let's move out. We have a schedule to keep." As the truckers returned to their rigs, Miguel gave Vega one final look. "You chose the wrong convoy tonight. But then, that's what I was counting on." The massive engines roared to life, headlights cutting through the fog as the convoy prepared to continue its journey. But now, strapped securely to the tops of the trucks like trophies, were the disarmed cartel members, visible warnings to anyone else who might consider stopping them. Only Vega remained separate, secured in the passenger seat of Miguel's truck. A hostage, a shield, and most importantly, bait for the trap Miguel had spent years planning. As the convoy rolled forward, clearing the makeshift barricade, Miguel keyed his radio. "Convoy moving, package secured, proceeding to phase 2. The mountains echoed with the rumble of diesel engines as the trucks disappeared into the fog, leaving behind only the emptied tequila bottles and bloodstains on the asphalt as evidence of the encounter. The hunters had become the hunted, and the real battle was just beginning. The mountain highway unwound before them like a great serpent, fog-shrouded curves revealing themselves only moments before the trucks reached them. Miguel drove with intense focus, one hand on the wheel, the other never far from his Beretta. Beside him, Sergio Vega had fallen into a tense silence, his initial stream of threats and curses exhausted. "Your bosses," Miguel said, breaking the quiet that had stretched between them for the past 20 minutes. "How quickly will they mobilize?" Vega glared at him. "Fast enough. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." Miguel nodded, as if the answer confirmed his expectations. "Good. I was counting on their response time." He checked the side mirrors, where he could see the other 3 trucks following closely behind, their unusual cargo secured to custom mounting points, an adaptation he'd insisted on months ago, claiming they were for oversized equipment. Now those mounts served a different purpose, securing bound cartel soldiers like conquered trophies. "You're insane," Vega muttered, watching Miguel's calm demeanor with increasing unease. Los Halcones has over 200 men in this region. Alone? You have what? 4 trucks? 4 drivers? Miguel allowed himself a small smile. Numbers can be deceiving, quality over quantity. The convoy rounded another bend, and Miguel's expression changed as he spotted what he'd been waiting for. An unmarked dirt road cutting away from the main highway. It was barely visible in the fog, which was precisely why he had chosen it. Diego, Luis, Raul, he spoke into his radio. Turn off approaching on the right. Follow me closely. Maintain formation. He slowed the massive truck, then executed a careful turn onto the narrow dirt road. The heavy vehicle swayed as they transitioned from asphalt to dirt, their powerful headlights illuminating dense forest on either side. This secondary road wasn't on most maps, a logging path used decades ago and long forgotten. But Miguel had studied every potential escape route in the region. "Where are you taking us?" Vega demanded, new concern edging his voice. "Somewhere private," Miguel replied. "Somewhere your reinforcements won't find us until I want them to." After a kilometer of careful driving along the deteriorating road, the trees opened into a clearing. The fog was thinner here, revealing the remnants of an old logging operation, a large clearing with a dilapidated storage building, loading, a dock, and enough open space for the trucks to maneuver. Miguel brought his truck to a stop, positioning it to face the approach road. The other 3 trucks followed suit, forming a defensive semicircle. Their headlights flooded the clearing with harsh light, casting long shadows from the surrounding pine trees. "Diego, establish the perimeter," Miguel ordered through the radio. As he shut down his engine, "Luis, secure our guests. Raul, communications." He turned to Vega. "Time for you to join your men." Miguel escorted Vega at gunpoint to the center of the clearing, where Luis was already unloading the other cartel members from their elevated positions on the trucks. Despite their bound hands and feet, the cartel soldiers maintained defiant glares as they were assembled in a sitting position, backs against each other for stability. Raul approached, carrying a hardened case from his truck. "Communications established," he reported, opening the case to reveal sophisticated radio equipment. "Scrambled frequency untraceable." Miguel nodded approvingly. "Monitor all local cartel channels. I want to know when they start searching for their missing men." Diego returned from placing motion sensors along the approach road. "Perimeter secure. We'll have 5 minutes warning if anyone comes up that road." With the immediate security concerns addressed, Miguel turned his attention to the cartel members. 8 men, including Vega, now sat in the center of the clearing, illuminated by the truck's headlights like actors on a stage. Their expressions ranged from fear to hatred, but the bravado of their roadblock had evaporated completely. "Now that we have some privacy," Miguel began, pacing slowly before them, "let's discuss why I've arranged this gathering." Vega spat on the ground. "There's nothing to discuss. You're dead men making your final arrangements." Miguel continued, as if he hadn't heard. "Los Halcones has grown too comfortable in this region. Highway robberies, extortion, murder, all while the authorities look the other way." He paused, studying each man's face. 7 years ago, I helped dismantle your organization's leadership. A temporary setback, it seems." Recognition dawned on some of the older cartel members' faces. One whispered something to another, eyes widening. "Yes," Miguel confirmed. "El Fantasma, the ghost of Sinaloa. Some of you remember the stories." "Those are just tales to scare new recruits," one of the men countered. but his voice lacked conviction. Miguel shrugged. Legends often begin with truth. He turned to Vega. Your predecessor learned that lesson too late. Raúl approached, holding up his radio. Chatter on their frequencies. They've missed the check-in. Search parties are being organized. Right on schedule, Miguel noted. Checking his watch, he turned back to the captives. In approximately 40 minutes, your colleagues will discover your abandoned roadblock. They'll find blood, empty tequila bottles, and no sign of where you've gone. Imagine their confusion. He retrieved a small digital camera from his pocket. Now we're going to send them a message, a very specific message. Miguel positioned himself behind the group of bound men, framing them in the camera's view with the truck's headlights creating dramatic backlighting. This video will explain to your superiors exactly what happens when Los Halcones interferes with medical deliveries in this region. The cartel members exchanged nervous glances as Miguel recorded, detailing their attempt to hijack life-saving medications and their subsequent capture by what he described as a specialized security detail protecting critical medical infrastructure. He never mentioned his own past or identity, presenting himself simply as the security leader. As a professional courtesy, Miguel continued on camera, we're offering Los Halcones a one-time opportunity to reconsider their operations in this corridor. Effective immediately, all medical transports are to be granted safe passage. Any further interference will result in a more permanent resolution to the problem. He lowered the camera, approaching Vega directly. Your bosses value strength and fear weakness. Right now, you represent their weakness. They'll never agree to your terms, Vega growled. They'll hunt you down and make examples of all of you. Miguel smiled. That's exactly what I'm counting on. He nodded to Luis, who approached with a satellite phone. Miguel placed it on the ground in front of Vega, just within reach of his bound hands. Call your commander again, Miguel instructed. Tell him exactly where we are, and that if he wants his men back alive, he needs to send exactly 2 vehicles, with no more than 6 men to negotiate terms. Vega's eyes narrowed. You want me to tell them where to find you? You're even crazier than I thought. Make the call, Miguel repeated, his voice hardening. Unless you prefer I send them pieces of you instead of a location. Vega hesitated, calculating his options, then awkwardly reached for the phone with his bound hands. After dialing, he relayed Miguel's instructions to someone he addressed as Commander. The conversation was short, terse, and ended with Vega looking distinctly uneasy. They're coming, he confirmed, as Miguel took the phone back. But not to negotiate. Miguel seemed unfazed. Of course not. How long? 30 minutes, maybe less. Miguel turned to his team. Prepare for Phase 3. The truckers moved with military precision, retrieving equipment from hidden compartments in their vehicles. What had appeared to be ordinary freight trucks began to reveal their modifications: reinforced panels, tactical storage, and hidden weapon caches. Diego unfolded a detailed topographical map on the hood of his truck. They'll come up the main. Road first, he noted, tracing the route with his finger. Standard procedure would be to send a larger force to block our escape route back to the highway. Miguel nodded. Exactly why we're not going that way. He pointed to another route on the map, barely visible even on the detailed chart. This old mining trail connects to a secondary highway 15 kilometers east. It's overgrown, but passable for our trucks if we take it slow. What about them? Luis asked, gesturing toward the bound cartel members. Miguel considered the prisoners momentarily. They stay. left exactly as they are. "You're leaving us for our own people to find?" Vega asked, confusion evident. "Yes," Miguel confirmed. "Alive, unharmed, but very much defeated. Your commander will arrive expecting to ambush us. Instead, he'll find only his own men, bound and humiliated with this." He held up a small electronic device with a blinking red light. "What is that?" Vega demanded. "Insurance," Miguel replied. "A transmitter broadcasting your location to federal authorities. Anonymous tip about a cartel gathering with high value. Our targets in attendance." Horror spread across Vega's face. "You're setting us up for a federal raid." "I'm creating a choice," Miguel corrected. "Your commander can waste time trying to hunt us down, or he can evacuate his men before the federales arrive." "He can't do both." Raul approached again, urgency in his step. "Motion sensors triggered on the approach road. We have company, earlier than expected." Miguel wasn't surprised. "They sent an advance team while mobilizing the main force." "Smart." He turned to his team. "Accelerated timeline, move to position B." The truckers quickly packed up their equipment, movements efficient from years of practice. Diego disabled the truck lights, plunging the clearing into darkness broken only by moonlight filtering through the fog. Luis and Raul moved to defensive, positions at the edge of the clearing, weapons ready. Miguel approached the bound cartel members one last time. "Consider this a professional courtesy," he told Vega. "A reminder that there are still lines that shouldn't be crossed. Medical supplies, food aid, civilian infrastructure, these are now protected routes. This changes nothing," Vega insisted, though with less conviction than before. Miguel shrugged. "Perhaps, but after tonight, every Los Halcones soldier will hesitate before stopping a truck on these roads. They'll wonder if ordinary truckers are what they appear to be. That hesitation creates security." He leaned closer. "And when the federales question you about tonight, remember, cooperation might shorten your sentence." A distant engine sound grew louder, approaching through the fog. Miguel checked his watch, then nodded to his team. "That's our cue." They retreated to their trucks, starting engines simultaneously. But instead of using headlights, they navigated with night vision equipment, another modification that distinguished these trucks from ordinary transports. Miguel took one last look at the cartel members silhouetted in the clearing. They would be found first by their comrades, then by federal authorities responding to the anonymous tip. Either way, the message would be sent. The 4 trucks moved out in single file, following Diego's lead down the narrow mining trail that would take them away from the approaching cartel reinforcements. Behind them, the electronic transmitter continued its silent broadcast, the digital breadcrumb that would bring federal forces directly to a gathering of Los Halcones leadership. As they navigated the overgrown trail, Raul's radio crackled with intercepted cartel communications, confused, angry voices trying to coordinate their response to a situation they didn't fully understand. Miguel smiled grimly at the chaos he'd engineered. The first phase of his plan had worked perfectly. The medical supplies would reach their destination, and Los Halcones had received a costly warning. But Miguel knew this was just the opening. Move in a larger strategy, one he'd been planning since he'd returned to these roads years ago. The cartel would adapt. They always did. But now they would know that the shadows concealed threats they hadn't considered, that ordinary trucks might harbor extraordinary dangers. As the convoy disappeared into the mountain fog, leaving the cartel to its fate, Miguel radioed ahead to the receiving hospitals, confirming their estimated arrival time. After all, despite everything that had happened, they still had a delivery to complete. The legend of El Fantasma would spread through cartel ranks by morning. The ghost of Sinaloa had returned, and this time he wasn't hunting from within government forces. He was hiding in plain sight behind the wheel of a freight truck on the mountain highways of Mexico. The old mining trail twisted through dense forest, barely wide enough for the massive trucks. Miguel navigated by moonlight and memory, the night vision equipment revealing the treacherous path in ghostly green hues. Behind him, the other 3 trucks followed in tight formation, their engines reduced to low rumbles to minimize detection. Radio. Silence unless absolutely necessary, Miguel instructed over the secure channel. Their scouts will be listening for engine noise. The convoy progressed slowly but steadily, the specialized suspension systems on their trucks handling the rough terrain better than standard rigs could. Another modification that had raised eyebrows when Miguel had insisted on it months ago. The company executives had questioned the expense, but Miguel had convinced them that the ability to navigate rough terrain would open up new delivery routes to remote communities. They hadn't known he was preparing for exactly this scenario. After 30 minutes of careful navigation, the forest began to thin. Miguel checked the GPS unit mounted discreetly on his dashboard. They were approaching the junction with the secondary highway, their escape route back to civilization and away from Los Halcones territory. "Junction ahead," he murmured into the radio. "Diego, take point and confirm the route is clear." Diego's truck eased past Miguel's, taking the lead position. The younger driver had been selected for this team precisely because of his reconnaissance training during his military service. Minutes later, his voice came through the radio. "Junction clear. No signs of cartel activity on the secondary highway." Miguel nodded to himself. "Good. Proceed to the highway. Standard formation, regular lights." We transitioned to being normal. Truckers again. One by one, the massive vehicles emerged from the forest path onto the paved secondary highway. Headlights switched on, illuminating the empty road stretching before them. To any observer, they would now appear to be nothing more than a convoy of freight trucks making a routine delivery, just as Miguel had planned. "Raul, what's the status on cartel communications?" Miguel asked once they were safely on the highway. "Picking up speed." "Chaos," Raul replied, satisfaction evident in his voice. "They found the clearing and their men. Commander is furious. They're spreading out search parties in all directions, but mostly back toward the main highway. They haven't identified our actual escape route yet." "And the Federales?" Responding to the anonymous tip. "ETA to the clearing approximately 15 minutes. Los Halcones is trying to evacuate, but they're scattered and disorganized." Miguel allowed himself a small smile. The plan was working perfectly. The cartel would be too busy dealing with the federal authorities to mount an effective pursuit. By the time they regrouped, the convoy would be well outside their territory, the medical supplies safely delivered. "What about our cargo?" Luis asked over the radio. "We're still on schedule for the hospital deliveries?" "Affirmative," Miguel confirmed. "We'll reach Chihuahua by dawn." The refrigeration units maintained optimal temperature throughout. No compromise to the medications. The convoy settled into a steady rhythm, eating up the kilometers on the empty highway. The adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, replaced by professional focus on completing their mission. They had successfully evaded Los Halcones, protected their cargo, and sent a powerful message to the cartel. But Miguel knew better than to celebrate prematurely. "Stay alert," he warned his team. "We're not in the clear, until the deliveries are complete. 2 hours later, as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, the convoy approached the outskirts of Chihuahua City. The urban landscape gradually replaced the wilderness, streetlights and early morning traffic signaling their return to civilization. Miguel directed the trucks toward their first delivery point, the central hospital that served as the distribution hub for smaller clinics throughout the region. As they maneuvered through the awakening city, Miguel noted a black SUV that pulled into traffic behind them, maintaining a consistent distance. His instincts, honed by years of operations, immediately registered a potential threat. Possible tail, he murmured into the radio. Black SUV, 3 vehicles back. Diego, confirm. Diego adjusted his mirrors. Confirmed. 2 occupants visible. Can't identify from this distance. Los Halcones? Luis asked, tension returning to his voice. Unlikely, Miguel assessed. They couldn't have tracked us this quickly or known our destination. Could be local associates, though, or simply coincidence. Hospital. Security has been alerted to our arrival, Raul reported. They'll have additional guards on the loading dock as requested. Miguel considered their options. Proceed as planned. We complete the deliveries regardless. Be prepared for complications. The convoy continued toward the hospital, weaving through increasingly dense morning traffic. The black SUV maintained its position, neither closing distance nor falling back, a textbook surveillance technique that confirmed Miguel's suspicions. They were definitely being followed. As they approached the hospital complex, Miguel made a quick decision. Change of plan. Luis, Raul, proceed to the hospital loading dock as scheduled. Diego and I will create a diversion to draw off our tail. Without waiting for acknowledgement, Miguel abruptly turned his truck at the next intersection, separating from the convoy. Diego followed immediately, their 2 trucks now heading away from the hospital, while Luis and Raul continued with the medical deliveries. The black SUV hesitated at the intersection, then followed Miguel and Diego, exactly as Miguel had anticipated. Whoever was following them was more interested in the drivers than the cargo. They took the bait, Diego confirmed. Still on our tail. Good, Miguel replied, accelerating slightly. Let's find out who they are. He navigated toward an industrial area on the city's edge, plenty of space, minimal civilian presence and multiple exit routes. Tactical considerations that came naturally after years of operations. As they entered a large, empty lot between warehouses, Miguel brought his truck to a stop, positioning it to block anyone approaching from behind. Diego pulled alongside, creating a defensive formation. The black SUV stopped at the entrance to the lot, maintaining distance. Armed? Diego asked, reaching beneath his seat for his weapon. Assume so, Miguel replied, drawing his Beretta. But let's not escalate unless necessary. They exited their trucks simultaneously, using the massive vehicles as cover, while maintaining clear sightlines to the SUV. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the SUV's doors opened, and 2 men stepped out. They wore civilian clothes, but their posture and movement betrayed professional training. Federal police, Miguel muttered, recognizing the telltale signs. Not cartel. The men approached slowly, hands visible and away from their sides. A deliberate show of non-aggression. When they reached speaking distance, the older of the 2 called out, Miguel Santos. Miguel stepped partially into view, keeping his weapon ready but not raised. Who's asking? The man reached slowly into his jacket and produced a federal police identification. Commander Ortega, Organized Crime Division. We need to talk. Miguel studied the ID from a distance, then glanced at Diego, who gave a subtle nod. The credentials appeared genuine. "About what?" Miguel called back, still maintaining his position of tactical advantage. "About a series of interesting events involving Los Halcones last night," Ortega replied, "and about why a former Special Forces operative is driving medical supplies through cartel territory." Miguel weighed his options. He had operated outside the law tonight, but with justifiable cause. The federal police had been compromised by cartel influence for years, but not all were corrupt. The question was whether Ortega fell into that category. "Show me your hands," Miguel demanded. "Both of you, turn around slowly." The officers complied, demonstrating they carried no hidden weapons. Miguel finally emerged fully from behind his truck, though he kept his Beretta at his side. "How did you find me?" he asked as they approached each other. Ortega smiled slightly. "The anonymous tip about Los Halcones gathering. Very specific coordinates, very convenient timing. It had your signature all over it, Santos." "You remember me?" "I remember the ghost of Sinaloa," Ortega confirmed. "Hard to forget the operative who brought down 3 cartel leadership structures in 2 years. Your methods were distinctive." Miguel didn't confirm or deny the association. The supplies needed to get through. Los Halcones was interfering. "So you took matters into your own hands," Ortega finished for him. "Just like old times." "Ah, you here to arrest me?" Miguel asked directly, reading himself for whatever might come next. Ortega laughed softly. "If I wanted to arrest you, I wouldn't have come with just my partner." He gestured around the empty lot. "No, this is a different kind of conversation. I'm listening. Los Halcones is in chaos this morning," Ortega explained. "Their northern lieutenant and 7 soldiers captured and humiliated. Federal authorities arriving just in time to arrest 3 high-level commanders who came to the rescue. The largest blow to their operation in years." Miguel remained impassive, waiting for Ortega to continue. "Officially, it was a successful federal operation based on intelligence gathering," Ortega continued. "A major victory in the war against the cartels. Medals will probably be issued." "Congratulations," Miguel said dryly. Unofficially, Ortega pressed on, ignoring the sarcasm. A ghost from the past reappeared. A man who used to work within the system, now operating outside it. Creating opportunities that official channels can exploit. Your point?" Ortega stepped closer. "My point, Santos, is that some of us have been fighting this war long enough to recognize valuable allies, even unconventional ones. Los Halcones has corrupted half the officials in 3 states. Traditional methods aren't working." Understanding dawned on Miguel. "You're not here to stop me." "On the contrary," Ortega confirmed. "I'm here to propose a relationship. Unofficial, deniable, but mutually beneficial." "What kind of relationship?" "Information sharing, coordination when possible, non-interference when necessary," Ortega outlined. "You continue your transportation business, perhaps expanding routes through troubled territories. We continue our official operations. Sometimes these efforts might complement each other." Miguel studied the federal commander with new interest. "You're proposing to look the other way while I conduct my own operations against the cartels." "I'm proposing that a truck driver with special skills might occasionally create situations that federal authorities can leverage," Ortega corrected carefully. "Hypothetically speaking, of course." The proposition was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Miguel had been operating alone since returning to civilian life, his former military contacts too compromised. or too cautious to maintain connections. An alliance with honest federal authorities, however informal, could significantly expand his effectiveness. "And if I refuse?" Miguel asked, testing the waters. Ortega shrugged. "Then we part ways. You go back to your deliveries. We go back to our investigations. Nothing changes, but an opportunity is missed." Miguel glanced at Diego, who had maintained his position by the truck, watching the exchange with careful attention. They had started this operation to protect medical deliveries, a limited defensive goal. What Ortega was suggesting would take their mission in a new direction. "I need to consult with my team," Miguel finally said. "This affects all of us." Ortega nodded, reaching into his pocket and retrieving a simple business card with only a phone number printed on it. "When you decide, call this number. It's secure. We'll arrange a proper meeting." Miguel accepted the card, tucking it into his shirt pocket. "The hospital deliveries are still our priority. We need to finish our route." "Of course," Ortega agreed, stepping back. "Your cargo is too important to delay. We'll talk again, Santos. Sooner rather than later, I hope." As the federal officers returned to their vehicle, Miguel rejoined Diego at the trucks. "What was that about?" Diego asked quietly. Miguel watched the black SUV drive away before answering. "A proposition. Maybe an opportunity. Maybe a trap. We'll need to discuss it with the others after the deliveries." Miguel nodded, climbing back into his truck. "After the deliveries, the medicine comes first." They returned to the hospital, where Luis and Raul had successfully unloaded the first shipment of medical supplies. The hospital administrator had greeted them personally, expressing gratitude for their timely arrival despite the transportation difficulties they had reported by radio. As the remaining cargo was unloaded for distribution to smaller clinics, Miguel gathered his team in a quiet corner of the loading dock. "The Federales made contact," he informed them, explaining Ortega's proposition. "They know who we are, what we did last night. They're offering cooperation instead of prosecution." Luis whistled softly. "That's unexpected. Is it legitimate?" Raul asked, always the skeptical one. Miguel considered the question. "Possibly. Ortega has a reputation for integrity. One of the few commanders who hasn't been compromised by cartel money." "So, what's our move?" Diego pressed. Miguel looked at each man in turn. These weren't just drivers he had recruited, but brothers in arms who shared his vision of protecting essential supplies from cartel interference. What had begun as a defensive operation could evolve into something more proactive, more impactful. "We complete our scheduled deliveries," he decided. "Then we consider Ortega's offer. If we accept, we'd be taking on greater risk, but also expanding our effectiveness." The team exchanged glances, years of shared experience allowing them to communicate volumes without words. Finally, Luis spoke for all of them. "We're with you, Miguel. Whatever you decide." Miguel nodded, a rare smile crossing his features. "Let's finish the job at hand. We'll discuss the future on the drive back." As they returned to their trucks to continue the final deliveries, Miguel reflected on how a routine transport had transformed into something much more significant. The legend of El Fantasma would spread through cartel ranks once again, but this time the ghost of Sinaloa wouldn't be hunting alone. The message had been sent. The medical routes would be protected, and perhaps, just perhaps, the war against the cartels had gained an unexpected new front, one operated from behind the wheels of ordinary-looking freight trucks, driven by men who were anything but ordinary truckers. The final deliveries proceeded without incident, each clinic receiving their vital medications with gratitude and no questions about the convoy's delayed arrival. Miguel supervised the unloading personally, ensuring that temperature-sensitive insulin and vaccines maintained their integrity throughout the process. The work was meticulous, demanding, a stark contrast to the chaotic confrontation hours earlier. By mid-afternoon, the empty trucks were refueled and ready for the return journey. Miguel gathered his team at a small roadside restaurant on the outskirts of Chihuahua, choosing a corner booth that offered privacy and clear sight lines to all entrances and exits, habits that had never left him since his operational days. Successful delivery, Miguel noted as coffee was served. All medications reached their destinations in perfect condition. Luis nodded. The hospital administrator mentioned they've had 3 shipments hijacked in the past year. The insulin shortage has been critical. Which brings us to our next decision, Miguel said, placing Commander Ortega's business card on the table. Do we continue as we have been, protecting our assigned routes when necessary, or do we expand our operation as Ortega suggested? The 4 men considered the question silently. They had all left military or law enforcement careers for various reasons. Disillusionment with corruption, frustration with bureaucratic limitations, or simply seeking quieter lives. Yet each had chosen to join Miguel's specialized transport team, knowing it might occasionally require more than standard driving skills. I don't trust the federales, Raul said finally, voicing the concern they all shared. Even the honest ones are constrained by politics, budgets, and jurisdictional boundaries. Ortega seems different, Diego countered. His unit has the highest conviction rate in the department. No corruption allegations in 15 years of service. Still, Luis interjected, there's a difference between accepting help when it's offered and actively coordinating operations. The former gives us flexibility, the latter creates dependency. Miguel listened to his team debate, appreciating their thoroughness. These weren't impulsive men, they were professionals who understood the complexities and dangers of what they were considering. What about our employer? Raul asked. Logistics International hired us to deliver medical supplies, not wage war on the cartels. Miguel smiled slightly. Logistics International is a shell company, Raul. I established it 3 years ago specifically to secure these transport contracts. Surprise registered on the faces of his team members. Even Diego, who had been with Miguel the longest, hadn't known this detail. You've been planning this for years, Diego realized. The specialized trucks, the selected routes through cartel territory, recruiting drivers with military backgrounds. This wasn't opportunistic, it was strategic. Miguel nodded. The cartels have been targeting medical transports because they're valuable and typically unprotected. Traditional security companies won't take these routes, too dangerous, too remote. So I created a company that would, staffed by men with the skills to handle complications. And last night's encounter with Los Halcones? Luis asked. Not specifically. Planned, Miguel admitted, but anticipated as an eventuality. The routes we drive are critical supply lines for rural hospitals. Someone was bound to try intercepting us eventually. The team processed this revelation, their perspective on their employment shifting. What had seemed like fortunate preparation now revealed itself as methodical groundwork for a larger purpose. So what exactly are you proposing? Raul asked directly. Miguel leaned forward, his voice dropping to ensure privacy. We continue our legitimate business, delivering essential supplies to communities that need them, but we expand our secondary mission, gathering intelligence on cartel movements along our routes, identifying key personnel and infrastructure, occasionally creating opportunities for federal intervention. And Ortega's role, Diego pressed. Information exchange, Miguel explained. We provide intelligence from areas where federal presence is minimal. He provides advance warning of cartel activities that might affect our routes, plus a degree of protection from overzealous authorities who might question our methods. Luis nodded slowly, understanding the strategy. We become the eyes and ears on routes the government can't effectively patrol, while maintaining our primary mission of getting supplies through. Exactly, Miguel confirmed. We're not becoming federal agents or vigilantes. We're simply ensuring our roads stay open and our deliveries reach their destinations by whatever means necessary. The team fell silent again, each man weighing personal risk against potential impact. Finally, Diego spoke for all of them. We're in, but we set clear boundaries with Ortega from the beginning. Our primary mission remains the deliveries. Everything else is secondary. Miguel nodded, relief evident in his expression. He hadn't been certain they would continue once they understood the full scope of his vision. I'll arrange a meeting with Ortega before our next scheduled run, he decided, pocketing the business card. Now, we have a return journey to plan. Los Halcones will be watching the main routes, looking to salvage their reputation. The team transitioned seamlessly into operational planning, mapping alternative routes that would take them safely out of Chihuahua and back to their depot in Hermosillo. Their earlier confrontation had brought them temporary advantage through confusion and federal intervention, but cartels had long memories and extensive networks. As they finalized their return route, Miguel's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message, a news alert from a regional security service he subscribed to. He read it quickly, then passed the phone to his team. It's already having an effect, he noted. The alert detailed a major federal operation against Los Halcones, resulting in the arrest of 3 high-level commanders and the seizure of significant assets. More interesting was the final paragraph, which mentioned growing rumors of El Fantasma's return, the legendary operative who had decimated cartel leadership years ago, now seemingly working outside official channels. The ghost stories are spreading, Luis observed, returning the phone. That could work for or against us. It creates uncertainty, Miguel explained. Cartels operate on intimidation and predictability. When they stop trucks, they expect compliance, born of fear. But now, every transport becomes a question mark. Is it just ordinary drivers or something else? They'll adapt, Raul warned. Increase their numbers, use more professional teams instead of drunk soldiers. Miguel nodded. They will, and so will we. After settling their bill, the team returned to their trucks, beginning the long journey back to their depot. Miguel took point, leading them along back roads and secondary highways, avoiding the main transportation corridors where Los Halcones would most likely establish checkpoints. As the kilometers passed beneath their wheels, Miguel reflected on how his personal mission had evolved. What had begun as a retirement project, finding purpose after military service by protecting vital supply lines, was transforming into something more substantial, a direct challenge to cartel control of the region's lifelines. Night fell as they crossed out of Chihuahua State, the border marked only by a weathered sign almost invisible in the darkness. Miguel maintained a vigilant watch, scanning the road ahead with the same intensity he once devoted to combat operations. The truck's cabin had become his new command center, the highway his battlefield. The radio crackled with Diego's voice. Vehicle approaching from behind, high speed. Miguel checked his mirrors, identifying the rapidly approaching headlights of a vehicle moving much faster than typical traffic on these remote roads. Single vehicle, Miguel assessed. Not a typical cartel approach. Still, be ready. The vehicle, a pickup truck with government markings, flashed its lights as it neared the convoy. Miguel maintained speed, unwilling to stop without confirmation of the driver's identity. The pickup pulled alongside Miguel's truck, and the driver held up a federal police badge against the window, Commander Ortega himself. Miguel finally slowed, pulling onto the shoulder of the road. The rest of the convoy followed suit, maintaining defensive positioning as Ortega parked ahead of them. "Stay alert," Miguel instructed his team as he exited his truck to meet the federal commander. Ortega approached alone, his expression grave in the glow of the truck's running lights. "Santos, we need to talk. You tracked us," Miguel observed, not bothering to hide his displeasure at the security breach. "I had to," Ortega replied. "What happened last night has escalated beyond what either of us anticipated." Miguel's instincts shifted to high alert. "Explain." "The Los Halcones leadership we captured. They had an emergency meeting scheduled for tomorrow with representatives from 3 other cartels. A summit to discuss territory expansion now that the Sinaloa organization is fractured. And now that meeting won't happen," Miguel concluded. "No, it will," Ortega corrected, "but with different participants. The cartels don't yet know their representatives are in federal custody. We've been monitoring communications, intercepting, and controlling the information flow." Understanding dawned on Miguel. "You're planning to spring a trap. Use the summit to capture leadership from multiple organizations simultaneously." Ortega nodded. "It's an unprecedented opportunity, but we need to maintain the illusion that Los Halcones' Northern Command is still operational for the next 24 hours. Which means we need El Fantasma to disappear quietly, not continue creating chaos." Miguel considered the implications. "You want us to lay low? Avoid further confrontations that might alert the other cartels something is wrong?" "Precisely," Ortega confirmed. "Just until the operation concludes. After that, we can discuss our arrangement more permanently." The request was reasonable. Ortega was leveraging last night's encounter into a much larger operation with potential regional impact. Yet something in the commander's demeanor raised Miguel's suspicions. "There's more you're not telling me," he stated, rather than asked. Ortega hesitated, then sighed. "Los Halcones has put a bounty on the convoy that humiliated their soldiers. 2 million pesos for information leading to the trucks or drivers. They don't know your identities yet, but they're combing through transportation records looking for patterns. We use different routes, different schedules," Miguel noted, "and Logistics International exists behind several layers of corporate anonymity. Still," Ortega pressed, "they're motivated and well-resourced. Your safety and our operation depends on you maintaining absolute discretion for the next day." Miguel nodded slowly. "We'll adjust our return route. Take longer but less traveled roads. No stops in populated areas until we reach the depot." "Thank you," Ortega said, clear relief in his voice. "I'll contact you when the operation concludes. We can formalize our arrangement then." As Ortega returned to his vehicle, Miguel rejoined his team, explaining the situation. "I don't like changing plans based on federal priorities," Raul objected. Feels like we're already becoming their tool rather than their partner. It's a reasonable request with mutual benefit, Miguel countered. Their operation could remove leadership from 4 cartels simultaneously. That's worth a detour on our part. After discussing alternatives, the team plotted a new return route that would take them well clear of populated areas where cartel informants might be watching. The journey would take several additional hours, but security justified the delay. As they resumed their journey into the night, Miguel reflected on how quickly the dynamics were shifting. What had begun as a defensive action to protect a single convoy was rippling outward, affecting federal operations and cartel strategies across the region. El Fantasma's return was no longer just a story told to frighten cartel recruits. It was becoming a practical consideration in the ongoing war for Mexico's highways. The trucks rolled steadily through the darkness, their headlights illuminating the empty road ahead. To any observer, they would appear to be nothing more than commercial transport vehicles making a routine delivery run. Their cargo holds were empty now, their mission officially complete. But Miguel knew their real cargo had become something less tangible, but more valuable. A message that certain routes were now protected, that medical supplies would reach their destinations regardless of who tried to interfere. It was a small victory in a much larger conflict, but for communities depending on those supplies, it made all the difference. As dawn approached, Miguel keyed his radio. 2 hours to the depot, then we rest, regroup, and prepare for the next run. The road ahead will be more challenging, but we've shown it can be navigated. His team acknowledged with brief affirmatives, professional to the core. They understood what they had committed to, not just employment as specialized drivers, but a mission with purpose and consequence. The cartel had stopped their convoy expecting easy prey, only to encounter something far deadlier. And that was just the beginning. The final deliveries proceeded without incident, each clinic receiving their vital medications with gratitude and no questions about the convoy's delayed arrival. Miguel supervised the unloading personally, ensuring that temperature-sensitive insulin and vaccines maintained their integrity throughout the process. The work was meticulous, demanding, a stark contrast to the chaotic confrontation hours earlier. By mid-afternoon, the empty trucks were refueled and ready for the return journey. Miguel gathered his team at a small roadside restaurant on the outskirts of Chihuahua, choosing a corner booth that offered privacy and clear sightlines to all entrances and exits, habits that had never left him since his operational days. Successful delivery, Miguel noted as coffee was served. All medications reached their destinations in perfect condition. Luis nodded. The hospital administrator mentioned they've had 3 shipments hijacked in the past year. The insulin shortage has been critical. Which brings us to our next decision, Miguel said, placing Commander Ortega's business card on the table. Do we continue as we have been, protecting our assigned routes when necessary, or do we expand our operation as Ortega suggested? The 4 men considered the question silently. They had all left military or law enforcement careers for various reasons: disillusionment with corruption, frustration with bureaucratic limitations, or simply seeking quieter lives. Yet each had chosen to join Miguel's specialized transport team, knowing it might occasionally require more than standard driving skills. I don't trust the federales, Raul said finally, voicing the concern they all shared. Even the honest ones are constrained by politics, budgets, and jurisdictional boundaries. Ortega seems different, Diego countered. His unit has the highest conviction rate in the department. No corruption allegations in 15 years of service. Still, Luis interjected, there's a difference between accepting help when it's offered and actively coordinating operations. The former gives us flexibility, the latter creates dependency. Miguel listened to his team debate, appreciating their thoroughness. These weren't impulsive men. They were professionals who understood the complexities and dangers of what they were considering. "What about our employer?" Raul asked. "Logistics International hired us to deliver medical supplies, not wage war on the cartels." Miguel smiled slightly. "Logistics International is a shell company, Raul. I established it 3 years ago specifically to secure these transport contracts." Surprise registered on the faces of his team members. Even Diego, who had been with Miguel the longest, hadn't known this detail. "You've been planning this for years," Diego realized. "The specialized trucks, the selected routes through cartel territory, recruiting drivers with military backgrounds. This wasn't opportunistic, it was strategic." Miguel nodded. "The cartels have been targeting medical transports because they're valuable and typically unprotected. Traditional security companies won't take these routes. Too dangerous, too remote. So I created a company that would, staffed by men with the skills to handle complications." "And last night's encounter with Los Halcones?" Luis asked. "Not specifically. Planned," Miguel admitted, "but anticipated as an eventuality. The routes we drive are critical supply lines for rural hospitals. Someone was bound to try intercepting us eventually." The team processed this revelation, their perspective on their employment shifting. What had seemed like fortunate preparation now revealed itself as methodical groundwork for a larger purpose. "So, what exactly are you proposing?" Raul asked directly. Miguel leaned forward, his voice dropping to ensure privacy. "We continue our legitimate business, delivering essential supplies to communities that need them. But we expand our secondary mission, gathering intelligence on cartel movements along our routes, identifying key personnel and infrastructure, occasionally creating opportunities for federal intervention." "And Ortega's role?" Diego pressed. "Information exchange," Miguel explained. "We provide intelligence from areas where federal presence is minimal. He provides advance warning of cartel activities that might affect our routes, plus a degree of protection from overzealous authorities who might question our methods." Luis nodded slowly, understanding the strategy. "We become the eyes and ears on routes the government can't effectively patrol, while maintaining our primary mission of getting supplies through." "Exactly," Miguel confirmed. "We're not becoming federal agents or vigilantes. We're simply ensuring our roads stay open and our deliveries reach their destinations by whatever means necessary." The team fell silent again, each man weighing personal risk against potential impact. Finally, Diego spoke for all of them. "We're in, but we set clear boundaries with Ortega from the beginning. Our primary mission remains the deliveries. Everything else is secondary." Miguel nodded, relief evident in his expression. He hadn't been certain they would continue once they understood the full scope of his vision. "I'll arrange a meeting with Ortega before our next scheduled run," he decided, pocketing the business card. "Now, we have a return journey to plan. Los Halcones will be watching the main routes, looking to salvage their reputation." The team transitioned seamlessly into operational planning, mapping alternative routes that would take them safely out of Chihuahua and back to their depot in Hermosillo. Their earlier confrontation had brought them temporary advantage through confusion and federal intervention, but cartels had long memories and extensive networks. As they finalized their return route, Miguel's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message, a news alert from a regional security service he subscribed to. He read it quickly, then passed the phone to his team. "It's already having an effect," he noted. The alert detailed a major federal operation against Los Halcones, resulting in the arrest of 3 high-level commanders and the seizure of significant assets. More interesting was the final paragraph, which mentioned growing rumors of El Fantasma's return, the legendary operative who had decimated cartel leadership years ago, now seemingly working outside official channels. "The ghost stories are spreading," Luis observed, returning the phone. "That could work for or against us." "It creates uncertainty," Miguel explained. "Cartels operate on intimidation and predictability. When they stop trucks, they expect compliance born of fear. But now, every transport becomes a question mark. Is it just ordinary drivers or something else?" "They'll adapt," Raul warned. "Increase their numbers, use more professional teams instead of drunk soldiers." Miguel nodded. "They will, and so will we." After settling their bill, the team returned to their trucks, beginning the long journey. Back to their depot, Miguel took point, leading them along back roads and secondary highways, avoiding the main transportation corridors where Los Halcones would most likely establish checkpoints. As the kilometers passed beneath their wheels, Miguel reflected on how his personal mission had evolved. What had begun as a retirement project, finding purpose after military service by protecting vital supply lines, was transforming into something more substantial, a direct challenge to cartel control of the region's lifelines. Night fell as they crossed out of Chihuahua State, the border marked only by a weathered sign, almost invisible in the darkness. Miguel maintained a vigilant watch, scanning the road ahead with the same intensity he once devoted to combat operations. The truck's cabin had become his new command center, the highway his battlefield. The radio crackled with Diego's voice. "Vehicle approaching from behind. High speed." Miguel checked his mirrors, identifying the rapidly approaching headlights of a vehicle moving much faster than typical traffic on these remote roads. "Single vehicle," Miguel assessed. "Not a typical cartel approach. Still, be ready." The vehicle, a pickup truck with government markings, flashed its lights as it neared the convoy. Miguel maintained speed, unwilling to stop without confirmation of the driver's identity. The pickup pulled alongside Miguel's truck, and the driver held up a federal police badge against the window, Commander Ortega himself. Miguel finally slowed, pulling onto the shoulder of the road. The rest of the convoy followed suit, maintaining defensive positioning as Ortega parked ahead of them. "Stay alert," Miguel instructed his team as he exited his truck to meet the federal commander. Ortega approached alone, his expression grave in the glow of the truck's running lights. "Santos, we need to talk." "You tracked us," Miguel observed, not bothering to hide his displeasure at the security breach. "I had to," Ortega replied. "What happened last night has escalated beyond what either of us anticipated." Miguel's instincts shifted to high alert. "Explain." "The Los Halcones leadership we captured, they had an emergency meeting scheduled for tomorrow with representatives from 3 other cartels. A summit to discuss territory expansion now that the Sinaloa organization is fractured. And now that meeting won't happen," Miguel concluded. "No, it will," Ortega corrected, "but with different participants. The cartels don't yet know their representatives are in federal custody. We've been monitoring communications, intercepting and controlling the information flow." Understanding dawned on Miguel. You're planning to spring a trap. Use the summit to capture leadership from multiple organizations simultaneously. Ortega nodded. It's an unprecedented opportunity, but we need to maintain the illusion that Los Halcones' Northern Command is still operational for the next 24 hours, which means we need El Fantasma to disappear quietly, not continue creating chaos. Miguel considered the implications. You want us to lay low, avoid further confrontations that might alert the other cartels something is wrong. Precisely, Ortega confirmed, just until the operation concludes. After that, we can discuss our arrangement more permanently. The request was reasonable. Ortega was leveraging last night's encounter into a much larger operation with potential regional impact. Yet something in the commander's demeanor raised Miguel's suspicions. There's more you're not telling me, he stated rather than asked. Ortega hesitated, then sighed. Los Halcones has put a bounty on the convoy that humiliated their soldiers. 2 million pesos for information leading to the trucks or drivers. They don't know your identities yet, but they're combing through transportation records looking for patterns. We use different routes, different schedules, Miguel noted, and Logistics International exists behind several layers of corporate anonymity. Still, Ortega pressed, they're motivated and well-resourced. Your safety and our operation depends on you maintaining absolute discretion for the next day. Miguel nodded slowly. We'll adjust our return route. Take longer but less traveled. Roads. No stops in populated areas until we reach the depot. Thank you, Ortega said, clear relief in his voice. I'll contact you when the operation concludes. We can formalize our arrangement then. As Ortega returned to his vehicle, Miguel rejoined his team, explaining the situation. I don't like changing plans based on federal priorities, Raul objected. Feels like we're already becoming their tool rather than their partner. It's a reasonable request with mutual benefit, Miguel countered. Their operation could remove leadership from 4 cartels simultaneously. That's worth a detour on our part. After discussing alternatives, the team plotted a new return route that would take them well clear of populated areas where cartel informants might be watching. The journey would take several additional hours, but security justified the delay. As they resumed their journey into the night, Miguel reflected on how quickly the dynamics were shifting. What had begun as a defensive action to protect a single convoy was rippling outward, affecting federal operations and cartel strategies across the region. El Fantasma's return was no longer just a story told to frighten cartel recruits. It was becoming a practical consideration in the ongoing war for Mexico's highways. The trucks rolled steadily through the darkness, their headlights illuminating the empty road ahead. To any observer, they would appear to be nothing more than commercial transport vehicles making a routine delivery run. Their cargo holds were empty now, their mission officially complete. But Miguel knew their real cargo had become something less tangible but more valuable. A message that certain routes were now protected, that medical supplies would reach their destinations regardless of who tried to interfere. It was a small victory in a much larger conflict, but for communities depending on those supplies, it made all the difference. As dawn approached, Miguel keyed his radio. 2 hours to the depot. Then we rest, regroup and prepare for the next run. The road ahead will be more challenging, but we've shown it can be navigated. His team acknowledged with brief affirmatives. Professional to the core. They understood what they had committed to, not just employment as specialized drivers, but a mission with purpose and consequence. The cartel had stopped their convoy, expecting easy prey. only to encounter something far deadlier, and that was just the beginning. The convoy reached their secure depot on the outskirts of Hermosillo, just as the sun crested the eastern mountains. Located within an industrial complex surrounded by high walls, topped with security cameras and motion sensors, the facility appeared unremarkable from the outside. Just another shipping terminal among dozens in the area. Inside, however, the differences became apparent. Miguel guided his truck through the reinforced gates, which closed immediately behind the final vehicle. The loading bays were standard, but the security systems were military-grade. Armed guards, former soldiers hired through Miguel's carefully cultivated network, patrolled the perimeter. Each had been personally vetted, their backgrounds and families protected by layers of confidentiality agreements and corporate anonymity. "Home safe," Diego remarked, as they parked the massive trucks in their designated bays. The team gathered in what appeared to be a standard dispatch office, but functioned as their operational center. "For now," Miguel cautioned, activating the room's electronic countermeasures. Another excessive security feature that now proved its worth. The subtle hum indicated that no electronic surveillance could penetrate the room's walls. Los Halcones. Won't forget what happened. And with Ortega's operation potentially disrupting multiple cartel leadership structures simultaneously, the backlash could be significant. Luis retrieved bottles of water from a refrigerator, distributing them to the team. "Should we postpone the next scheduled run? Give things time to settle?" Miguel shook his head firmly. "That's exactly what we cannot do. The insulin shipment, scheduled for next week, is critical. 3 clinics in Sierra Madre have reported they're almost out of supply. Delaying would put patients at risk. So we proceed as planned, but with enhanced security measures," Raul concluded, already pulling up the route maps on a secured computer terminal. "Precisely," Miguel confirmed. "Also, I want to make some equipment modifications to the trucks before the next run. The night vision systems proved valuable, but we need additional defensive options if the cartels decide to escalate their approach." The G-in team spent the next hour debriefing their recent operation, analyzing what had worked well and identifying vulnerabilities. Miguel recorded the details methodically, his military training evident in the structured assessment. When they finished, he dismissed his exhausted team to get much-needed rest. 12-hour stand down, he instructed. "Then we begin preparations for the next run." As the others departed for their quarters in the residential section of the compound, Miguel remained in the operations room, reviewing intelligence reports from his network of contacts throughout the region. Former colleagues, retired police officers, local business owners, each provided pieces of information about cartel movements and activities along their delivery routes. A knock at the door interrupted his concentration. The facility's chief of security, Guillermo Vargas, entered after Miguel's acknowledgement. "Perimeter sensors detected surveillance on the north approach," Guillermo reported, placing a tablet before Miguel showing footage from their long-range cameras. 2 men in an unmarked vehicle, observing the facility for approximately 20 minutes before departing. Miguel studied the images, noting the professional positioning of the vehicle and the systematic way the observers photographed the facility's exterior. Not cartel. Their surveillance is typically more obvious, designed to intimidate as much as gather intelligence. "Government, then?" Guillermo suggested. "Possibly," Miguel conceded. "Or private contractors. Either way, it confirms we need to accelerate our security upgrades." Guillermo nodded. I've already implemented the protocol changes you requested. Additional guards on rotating shifts, enhanced background checks on all maintenance personnel, and randomized patrol patterns. Good, Miguel approved. Also, effective immediately, all trucks leave and return via different gates at unpredictable intervals, no established patterns they can track. After Guillermo departed, Miguel turned to a secure safe embedded in the office wall. Using a combination known only to him, he retrieved a satellite phone different from the one his team had seen him use. This device connected to a network reserved for former special operations personnel, an unofficial back channel maintained by veterans who understood that some communications needed to remain outside official monitoring. He dialed a memorized number and waited as the call connected through multiple encryption layers. "It's been a while," answered a voice without preamble or identification. "Circumstances change," Miguel replied simply. "I need verification on a federal commander. Ortega, Organized Crime Division. How clean is he?" The voice on the other end paused briefly. "Mostly legitimate. 3 investigations into his conduct, all dismissed. He's ambitious, though. Promotion board next month. He needs high-profile successes." The information aligned with Miguel's assessment, but added valuable context. Ortega's ambition could make him either a more committed ally or a more dangerous variable. And the operation against the cartel summit? Real, the voice confirmed. Major resources allocated. Multiple agencies involved. Someone high up is taking personal interest. Understood, Miguel acknowledged. "One more thing. Has there been any chatter about El Fantasma resurfacing?" A longer pause this time. "Some, mostly dismissed as local superstition. A few analysts making connections to recent disruptions in cartel activities. Nothing conclusive. Yet. Should there be?" "Just monitoring old stories," Miguel deflected. "Appreciate the information." He ended the call and returned the special phone to its secure location. The verification of Ortega's operation was reassuring, but the mention of high-level interest raised new concerns. Visibility meant scrutiny, and scrutiny could compromise their independence. Miguel closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of genuine fatigue. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation and subsequent journey had finally dissipated, leaving behind the aches of a body that, despite rigorous maintenance, was no longer that of a young operator. At 58, he felt every impact, every tense hour behind the wheel more acutely than he once had. Yet he had no regrets about his chosen path. After leaving military service, he had watched the cartels expand their control over transportation networks throughout Mexico, choking off vital supplies to vulnerable communities. Official efforts to secure these routes were hampered by corruption, insufficient resources, and jurisdictional limitations. The need for an alternative approach had become increasingly apparent. Logistics International had begun as a concept. What if specialized transport teams could ensure critical supplies reached their destinations, regardless of who controlled the territories they passed through? Not through bribery or accommodation, but through capability and deterrence. 3 years of careful planning, recruitment, and infrastructure development had transformed that concept into reality. The company maintained a legitimate business profile, fulfilling transport contracts that other services deemed too risky. Behind that facade operated a more specialized capability, the ability to move essential supplies through contested territories. employing former military and law enforcement personnel who understood both transportation logistics and security operations. Until last night, they had managed to avoid direct confrontation, relying on careful route planning and subtle deterrence. The encounter with Los Halcones had forced them into the open, at least partially. The consequences remained to be seen. Miguel checked the time, then accessed the facility's secure communications server. Ortega's operation against the cartel summit would be underway within hours. Its success or failure would significantly impact their next steps. A message notification appeared on his screen, an automated alert from one of the information gathering systems he had established. News reports were emerging about unusual federal police activity near the expected summit location. The operation was moving into active phase. Miguel closed the notification and finally allowed himself to seek the rest his body demanded. He walked through the secured corridor connecting the operations center to the residential wing, nodding to the security personnel on duty. His private quarters were Spartan but comfortable. A bedroom, small living area, and personal workspace equipped with secure communications. He had just settled onto his bed when another message arrived. This one directly to his personal device. It contained only geographic coordinates and a single word: confirmed. One of his sources was verifying the location of the cartel summit. The information matched what Ortega had shared, lending further credibility to the federal operation. Miguel sent a brief acknowledgement, then finally allowed himself to sleep, knowing the facility's security systems would alert him to any significant developments. As consciousness faded, his mind continued processing options and contingencies, the perpetual operational planning that had become second nature during his years of service. 6 hours later, the facility's alert system woke him with a priority notification. Miguel transitioned instantly from sleep to full awareness, checking the message that had triggered the alert. It was from Commander Ortega, sent through the secure channel they had established. Operation successful. Multiple high-value targets acquired. Need to meet ASAP. Miguel encrypted a short reply, suggesting a meeting location outside Hermosillo, a neutral site he had used for sensitive conversations in the past. As he prepared for the meeting, additional news alerts arrived, confirming unusual law enforcement activity and road closures near the suspected summit location. The operation appeared to have proceeded as planned. When Miguel emerged from his quarters, he found Diego already in the operations center, monitoring communications and news feeds. "You saw the reports?" Diego asked without looking up from his screens. "Yes," Miguel confirmed. Ortega reached out. "Claims the operation was successful. Do we trust that assessment?" Miguel considered the question carefully. "Partially. I'm meeting him to get details and discuss next steps. The cartel response to this operation will affect our security calculations for the next delivery run." "Want backup?" Diego offered. "No," Miguel decided after a moment's consideration. "Better if I go alone. Less conspicuous, but maintain active monitoring of the meeting location. If communications go dark for more than 20 minutes, implement contingency protocol." Diego nodded, understanding the implication. Contingency protocol involved emergency extraction procedures developed during their military service and explicitly acknowledged the possibility of betrayal or ambush. Miguel selected an unmarked SUV from the facility's vehicle pool, different from any he had used previously. Before departing, he conducted a thorough inspection for tracking devices or tampering, then programmed a roundabout route to the meeting location that would reveal any surveillance. The designated meeting point was a small roadside chapel 15 kilometers outside Hermosillo, rarely visited except during specific religious observances, but maintained by local families who ensured it remained unlocked for travelers seeking a moment of reflection. Its isolated position offered clear sightlines in all directions, with multiple approach and escape routes. Miguel arrived 30 minutes early, using the time to secure the location and establish observation points. He identified 3 potential sniper positions, 2 vehicle concealment areas, and optimal fields of fire from the chapel's ancient stone walls. The tactical assessment was automatic, ingrained through years of operational planning. Commander Ortega arrived precisely on time, driving an unmarked police vehicle. He came alone as agreed, parking in the small gravel lot beside the chapel. Miguel watched through high-powered binoculars as Ortega exited his vehicle, scanned the surroundings, then approached the chapel's weathered wooden doors. Only when Ortega was inside did Miguel emerge from his concealed position, entering through a side door that allowed him to maintain tactical advantage. Punctual, Miguel noted as he appeared from the shadows, keeping a hand near his concealed Beretta. Ortega showed no surprise at Miguel's cautious approach. Professional courtesy. I imagine you've been here for some time already. Miguel didn't confirm or deny the observation. You said the operation was successful. Ortega nodded, removing a tablet from inside his jacket and activating it. Beyond expectations, we captured leadership elements from 4 cartel organizations simultaneously: Los Halcones, Tijuana, Juarez, and a Gulf cartel splinter faction. The intelligence value alone is unprecedented. He turned the tablet toward Miguel, displaying surveillance photos of handcuffed men being loaded into transport vehicles. Miguel recognized several faces from intelligence briefings during his military service, high-value targets who had eluded capture for years. Impressive, Miguel acknowledged. Though the power vacuum this creates will trigger new conflicts as subordinates compete for control. Inevitable, Ortega agreed, retrieving his tablet, but it also creates opportunity. Disruption of established hierarchies makes the cartels vulnerable to further intervention. Which brings me to our arrangement. Miguel maintained a neutral expression. I'm listening. Ortega straightened his posture slightly, the gesture of a man about to make a formal proposal. The success of this operation has earned my unit expanded authority and resources. We're establishing specialized task forces targeting cartel infrastructure throughout northern Mexico. Your transportation security model could be an invaluable component. In what capacity? Miguel pressed, wanting explicit parameters. Intelligence, gathering along your delivery routes, occasional tactical support when our operations align with your schedules, a relationship of mutual benefit without official documentation or oversight. The proposal was essentially what they had discussed previously, but Ortega's newly secured position lent it additional credibility and resources. Still, Miguel maintained his caution. And the boundaries? My operation remains independent, focused, primarily on ensuring deliveries reach their destinations. Ortega nodded. Absolutely. We're not asking you to become federal agents or alter your primary mission, simply to share information relevant to our objectives and occasionally create opportunities similar to what happened with Los Halcones. Miguel considered the proposal silently, weighing potential benefits against risks. A connection with Ortega's unit could provide valuable intelligence and a degree of operational security. Conversely, it created dependencies and potential compromise points. The calculation wasn't simple. "I need to consult with my team," Miguel finally responded. "This affects all of us." "Of course," Ortega acknowledged, "but don't delay too long. The situation is fluid, and our window of opportunity may be limited." As their meeting concluded, Miguel returned to his vehicle, taking an even more circuitous route back to the depot. The potential alliance with Ortega represented a significant evolution of their operation, from defense-oriented security to proactive countermeasures against cartel control of transportation corridors. The question remained whether such an evolution served their primary mission or compromised it. As Miguel drove through the gathering dusk, he weighed loyalty to his team against the broader impact they might achieve with federal support. The decision ahead would define not just their next delivery run, but the future of everything they had built. The Logistics International Depot buzzed with activity when Miguel returned, his team already assembled in the operations center. From their expressions, Miguel knew something significant had occurred during his absence. "What happened?" he asked, closing the secure door behind him. Diego gestured toward the main display screen, which showed a breaking news report. Los Halcones made a statement, public and dramatic. The screen displayed footage of a small-town plaza somewhere in Sonora State. 3 bodies hung from a pedestrian bridge, a banner stretched between them with a message clearly meant for public consumption. "This awaits anyone who interferes with Los Halcones business." "When?" Miguel demanded, stepping closer to examine the footage. 2 hours ago, Raul reported. San Miguel de Horcasitas, small town, minimal police presence. The victims were local truck drivers who refused to pay protection money for using the regional highways. Miguel's jaw tightened. The cartel was reasserting dominance after their leader's capture, sending an unmistakable message about who controlled the roads and the consequences of defiance. "There's more," Luis added, switching the display to another news report. "Roadblocks have appeared on 3 major highways leading into Chihuahua State. Not official checkpoints, cartel operations stopping and searching all commercial vehicles." The tactical implications were immediate and concerning. Their next scheduled delivery, the critical insulin shipment, required passage through one of those corridors. "They're hunting us," Diego concluded. "Maybe not specifically, but they're tightening control over all transportation routes after what happened." Miguel nodded, processing the new information against what he'd learned from Ortega. The federal operation created exactly the power vacuum we anticipated. The remaining Los Halcones lieutenants are flexing their authority, proving they still control the territory despite leadership losses. He briefed his team on his meeting with Ortega, outlining the commander's proposal for enhanced cooperation between their operations. Their reactions were mixed, as he had expected. "We're delivery specialists, not federal operatives," Raul objected, the most cautious of the group. "Mission creep is dangerous in our position, but our primary mission is already compromised," Diego countered. "If we can't move freely on these roads, we can't deliver the supplies. Strategic alliance might be our only option." Luis, ever the pragmatist, focused on immediate concerns. "Regardless of long-term strategy, we have insulin deliveries scheduled. In 5 days, 3 clinics depending on those supplies, alternative routes. Miguel activated the digital map table at the center of the room, displaying the regional transportation network. Red markers indicated known or suspected cartel checkpoints, including the new roadblocks reported in the news. Traditional routes are compromised, he acknowledged, tracing the standard delivery corridors with his finger. But there are alternatives. He highlighted a series of secondary roads that wound through the Sierra Madre mountains, far more challenging terrain, but less likely to be monitored by cartel operations. This adds 8 hours to the journey, Diego noted with a frown. Plus, additional fuel consumption and vehicle wear, and increases risk of mechanical failure in remote areas, Raúl added. Miguel nodded, acknowledging the valid concerns. True, but it also virtually eliminates the risk of cartel interdiction. The mountain communities along this route have actively resisted Los Halcones' influence. Some have even formed their own defense groups. The team studied the proposed route, mentally calculating challenges and contingencies. It wasn't ideal. The narrow, winding mountain roads would be difficult for their large vehicles, particularly in adverse weather conditions. But it offered a path forward that maintained their operational independence while fulfilling their delivery obligations. We'll need to modify the suspension systems again, Luis noted. The current configuration isn't optimized for that kind of terrain, and adjust our security protocols, Diego added. Different threat profile in the mountains, less organized cartel presence, but potential for opportunistic bandits or isolated checkpoints. Miguel watched his team transition smoothly. From concern to problem solving, pride evident in his expression. This was why he had selected these men, not just for their combat skills or driving expertise, but for their adaptability and commitment to the mission. Make the necessary modifications, he decided. We leave in 4 days. I want the trucks ready for mountain terrain by tomorrow evening for testing. As the team dispersed to begin preparations, Miguel returned to the secure communications terminal. The situation demanded a response to Ortega's proposal, one that maintained their operational freedom while leveraging potential federal resources. His message was concise. Alternative route identified for upcoming delivery. Will proceed independently. Can share intelligence on cartel roadblocks if valuable to your operations. Further cooperation to be evaluated after successful completion of current mission. It wasn't the close partnership Ortega had proposed, but it offered a middle path. Information. Sharing without operational dependency. Miguel doubted the commander would be fully satisfied, but professional respect might lead him to accept the arrangement as a starting point. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity. The trucks underwent significant modifications, enhanced suspension systems, reinforced undercarriages to protect against rough terrain, and additional fuel capacity for the longer route. Diego led efforts to update their defensive systems, focusing on countermeasures against the specific threats they might encounter in mountain regions. Luis coordinated with the medical suppliers, adjusting pickup schedules and reinforcing the temperature-controlled cargo systems to ensure the insulin remained viable throughout the extended journey. Raúl developed new communications protocols, accounting for the limited signal coverage in the mountains and establishing backup procedures if primary systems failed. Miguel oversaw the entire operation while maintaining his intelligence gathering network. Reports continued to flow in about Los Halcones activities, increased roadblocks, aggressive vehicle searches, and occasional violence against transporters who resisted. The cartel was clearly responding to the leadership losses by asserting territorial control with renewed ferocity. Ortega responded to Miguel's message with surprising acceptance, requesting only that they maintain open communication channels during their journey and report any significant cartel activities observed along their route. The commander seemed to understand that pushing for closer integration too quickly might jeopardize the nascent relationship. On the evening before their scheduled departure, Miguel gathered his team for final preparations. The 4 trucks stood, ready in the loading bay, their modifications complete and thoroughly tested. The cargo, temperature-controlled containers of insulin and other critical medications, had been carefully secured and monitoring systems activated. Final briefing, Miguel announced, unfolding a detailed map of their route across the planning table. We depart at 0400 hours, before dawn. First segment is standard highway for approximately 200 kilometers. Then we transition to mountain routes near Sahuaripa. He traced the path with his finger, highlighting key points. Major elevation changes begin here. Narrow passages with limited visibility here, here, and here. Potential choke points marked in red. We maintain minimum safe distance between vehicles. To avoid bunching up in vulnerable areas, Diego pointed to several locations along the route. I've identified defensive positions at each potential choke point. If we encounter resistance, these provide optimal cover and fields of fire. Communications. Protocol, Miguel asked, turning to Raul. Satellite phones with encrypted transmission as primary, Raul explained. Radio as backup in areas with line-of-sight coverage. Emergency transponders active throughout the journey, broadcasting on secure frequencies monitored by our depot. Security team, Luis added his logistics assessment. Fuel consumption calculations complete. We can make the entire journey without refueling. Though I've identified 3 secure locations along the route where we could replenish, if absolutely necessary. Miguel nodded, satisfied with the thoroughness of their preparation. Questions or concerns? The team exchanged glances, then Diego voiced what they all recognized. This route takes us through territories where even Los Halcones treads carefully. The mountain communities have their own rules, their own systems of authority. Some might see us as intruders rather than allies. Valid concern, Miguel acknowledged, which is why I've made arrangements. He retrieved a satellite phone from his pocket, not the standard issue they all carried, but an older model with distinctive modifications. I still have contacts in these regions from my operational days. People who remember El Fantasma not as an enemy, but as an ally against cartel expansion. The team looked at him with renewed interest. This was an aspect of Miguel's past he rarely discussed. His work with local communities during his military service, building networks of cooperation against cartel influence. I've advised key community leaders of our passage, Miguel explained. Not detailed information, but enough for them to understand we're not a threat. They'll spread the word through their channels. Will that be enough? Luis asked skeptically. Miguel's expression was measured. It's not guaranteed, but it establishes basic trust. These communities survive by distinguishing friend from foe very quickly. They've been fighting cartels longer than any of us. The briefing concluded with final assignment of responsibilities and confirmation of emergency protocols. As the team prepared for a few hours of rest before their early departure, Miguel conducted one last inspection of the vehicles and cargo. Everything was in order, every contingency accounted for, as much as possible in an operation with so many variables. In his private quarters, Miguel retrieved a small wooden box from beneath his bed. Inside lay mementos from his previous life, photographs of operational teams with faces that had long since disappeared from official records, medallions awarded for classified missions, and a worn leather journal documenting campaigns that would never appear in public histories. Beneath these items rested an object he rarely acknowledged, a hand-carved wooden mask, small enough to fit in his palm. It had been given to him by a village elder in the Sierra Madre after Miguel's unit had driven cartel forces from their community. "So that your spirit may walk these mountains, even when your body cannot," the elder had told him. Miguel held the mask briefly, then returned it to the box. Tomorrow El Fantasma would indeed return to those mountains, not as an operational specter, but as a transporter bringing life-saving medications to communities the government had largely forgotten. As he prepared for sleep, Miguel's satellite phone signaled an incoming message. It was from Ortega. Increased Los Halcones activity reported near Sahuaripa. Multiple vehicles moving into mountain areas where they rarely operate. Exercise extreme caution. Miguel frowned at the information. The timing wasn't coincidental. Los Halcones appeared to have intelligence about their alternate route, or at least suspicions. The question was how they had obtained it. Had their operational security been compromised? Was there a leak within their organization or Ortega's unit? He forwarded the warning to his team with additional instructions. Enhanced alert status throughout journey. Possible route compromise. Prepare for potential confrontation in mountain sectors. The mission had just become significantly more complex. But as Miguel finally closed his eyes for a few hours of rest, his resolve remained unshaken. The insulin would reach its destination, regardless of who tried to stand in their way. At precisely 0400 hours, the 4 trucks rolled out of the depot. Into the pre-dawn darkness, lights dimmed to minimum safe levels. Communications limited to essential traffic. Their journey had begun. A race against both time and those who would deny critical medicine to communities in need. Miguel led the convoy, his truck's powerful engine rumbling confidently as they left Hermosillo behind. In the side compartment, beside his seat, rested his Beretta, cleaned and loaded, along with additional tactical equipment he hoped wouldn't be necessary. The first light of dawn was still hours away as the convoy headed toward the mountains, their headlights cutting through the darkness like spears. Whatever awaited them in the Sierra Madre, whether cartel ambush or safe passage, Miguel and his team would face it together. The delivery would be completed. The mission would be fulfilled. It was what they did. It was who they were. Not just truckers, but guardians of lifelines that others sought to sever. The mountain pass loomed ahead as dawn broke over the Sierra Madre. Miguel's convoy navigated the treacherous terrain with expert precision, their modified trucks handling the rough. Roads better than expected. Then as they rounded a sharp bend, they saw it. A makeshift roadblock of vehicles and armed men. Los Halcones had found them after all. Miguel didn't hesitate. "Formation Alpha," he commanded through the radio. The trucks immediately shifted into a diamond pattern, creating overlapping fields of protection. The cartel opened fire first, bullets pinging off reinforced panels. Miguel's team responded with coordinated precision, their military training evident in every movement. What followed wasn't just a firefight, it was a tactical dismantling of cartel forces by superior operators. When the dust settled, the roadblock was neutralized. The convoy rolled forward, Los Halcones soldiers left disarmed and in disbelief at how quickly their ambush had collapsed. One of them, a young recruit, stared in awe as Miguel approached. "Remember this," Miguel said quietly. "Medical routes are now protected. Spread the word." 3 hours later, the insulin arrived at the clinics, where children waited for life-saving medication. Doctors shook Miguel's hand with tears in their eyes, unaware that the quiet trucker had once been El Fantasma, the legendary operative now protecting Mexico's most vulnerable from behind the wheel of a freight truck. Word spread quickly through cartel territories. Mess with medical transports, and you meet something far deadlier than ordinary truckers. Los Halcones never tried to stop Miguel's Convoy again. If you've enjoyed this incredible true story of courage against overwhelming odds, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Hit that notification bell to hear more tales of ordinary heroes doing extraordinary things when pushed to their limits. Leave a comment below. Would you have had the courage to stand your ground like Miguel did?